Hallo zusammen zu Irisch gut, zu den Stories und Tipps von der grünen Insel. Das hier ist Folge 53 und in der sind wir in Cork unterwegs. Zweitgrößte Stadt Irlands, heimliche Hauptstadt Irlands. Zumindest sehen das ihre Bewohnerinnen und Bewohner so. Mit einer sehr langen und faszinierenden Geschichte, mit einer großen Uni, deren Studierende das Leben hier prägen. Also das ist eine alte, aber auch ganz junge Stadt, in der man ganz viel sehen und erleben kann. Und wenn man das möchte, dann macht man das am besten mit dieser Frau hier.
So my name is Angela Newman and I run Historical Histories Cork. And our company runs unique dinner theatre experiences in Cork City, and we also run pick your own path walking tours of Cork as well, where people get to choose which path they're going to take as the tour is happening. So even I, as the tour guide, don't know which tour we're doing in the morning when I get up for work. It's very entertaining.
Touren durch Cork, bei denen die Teilnehmer selbst über den Verlauf entscheiden. Und das mit einer Frau, die mehr über die Stadt weiß als die allermeisten anderen der fast 250.000 Einwohnerinnen und Einwohner und die mit großer Begeisterung davon erzählen kann. Das klingt doch super. Also lassen wir uns heute mal von Angela ein bisschen was über Cork berichten. Was meint ihr? Hier kommt
Irisch gut. Stories und Tipps von der grünen Insel.
Ich habe Angela an einem Tag in Cork getroffen, an dem das Wetter so war, wie man es nicht haben möchte, wenn man in Irland unterwegs ist. Und weil wir draußen hätten schwimmen müssen, haben wir uns kurzerhand in einen gemütlichen und trockenen Pub verzogen. Da hat sie erst einmal erzählt, wie sie eigentlich auf die Idee gekommen ist mit den Touren, die nach den Wünschen der Teilnehmer ablaufen.
There was, I think, a type of children's storybook in the 80s and 90s, which was kind of along those paths where you would read a page and it would say, if you want to choose this path, turn to page 32, or, so that's kind of where we got the idea from. Rather than doing the same tour that everyone does or the same tour every day, for months and months and years, I decided it would be really interesting to let the people choose what they want to do. So when they arrive to do the walking tour, I get them to choose between 3 or 4 photographs, and they choose whichever photograph speaks to them the most, and then that's the tour that I take them on. And then along the way there's choices whether they get to participate and be characters from Irish history or Cork history with me in the tour or not, and they can choose right or left in some places as well.
Nice.
It's great fun, and it's never the same. It's different anyway when you're doing walking tours with people, depending on the group, but it really is completely different most times that we do it, and it keeps us interested as tour guides, but it also keeps people interested, and it means that people will come back and choose a different tour the second time or the third time, Yeah.
Man will ja auch als Tourguide wahrscheinlich nicht 1017 Mal die gleiche Runde drehen, oder? Aber ich wollte das noch mal ein bisschen genauer wissen.
So what's on the photographs?
So the photographs, we've got photographs of, the first one is Nan O'Neill. And so she personally, she's one of my favourite people from history. So Nan O'Neill was, I suppose you'd call her a kind of almost an aristocrat in the 1700s in Ireland, and she was around at a time with the penal laws were around in Ireland, where if you were Catholic, you were kind of severely penalised for your religion. So, for example, you weren't allowed to own a horse that was worth more than £5. You weren't allowed to travel more than 5 miles. Kind of like with COVID restrictions, you weren't allowed to travel more than 5 miles from your house. You weren't allowed to practice your religion publicly. So there was a lot of these rules, and so at the time, the wealthier Catholics would send their children to be educated in France, where it was okay to be Catholic and they'd get an education, because if you were a Catholic in Ireland, you weren't allowed to educate your children. And so while she was in France, having a great time for herself with her sister and wearing silk and going to balls, they were passing a lot of poorer people in France, in Paris. And when she came home, she realised that the same problem was here in her own city. And she decided, that it wasn't fair that she had an education and these other children weren't. And, so what she did was, to make a really long story short, what she did was she created these schools, which were basically nicknamed hedge schools, which were hidden away in secret in the countryside. It literally would have been behind hedges and behind rocks. But here in the city, it would have been in sympathetic friends' houses who could get into an awful lot of trouble for allowing that to happen. But she basically started the Presentation Order of Nuns, which are now a global order of nuns. And she's from Cork City, but also her first convent, South Presentation, is right in the city centre here. And she's buried in the grounds as well. And so that's part of the Saints and Sinners tour. So that's the first one.
Saints and Sinners.
Saints and Sinners.
Okay.
There's a lot of sinners too in Cork. But we have two saints. We've got Nan O'Neill and we have Saint Finbar, who founded the city of Cork. So that's one of the photographs. And then they get shown as a group photo, which includes two of our past Lord Mayors, Terence McSweeney and Tomás McCurtain, and we're actually sitting on McCurtain Street right now, which is named after Tomás McCurtain. So these two Lord Mayors were very unfortunate to be Lord Mayors at the time that they were Lord Mayors in Cork. So in 1920, one of the Lord Mayors, Tomás McCurtain, was assassinated by the Royal Irish Constabulary in his own bed in his house as retaliation for murder of a British soldier on the street outside, which was called King Street. And basically, his murder was the beginning of what would be probably the worst year in Cork history, if not Irish history, 1920. And later on, his next Lord Mayor, his friend, which is why they're in the photograph together, Terence McSweeney, he was arrested for having seditious papers in his desk, I guess, at work as the Lord Mayor, and he was imprisoned in London with 10 other men, and he went on hunger strike. And after 75 days of hunger strike, he passed away, and it was one of the biggest funerals Ireland has ever seen, and it really garnered a lot of support and a lot of press attention from everywhere in the world. So it kind of put Cork on the map and our struggle for independence on the map. So that photograph represents the Rebel City tour, because there's been a lot of Rebel City, and most people think we get the rebel reputation in Cork City for something that's been in our recent history, but actually it goes far further back to the 1400s, where we got our rebel reputation from. But most people don't realise that. We've always been a rebel county. That's why it's stuck.
Also, eine Tour dreht sich Heilige und Sünder, die Saints and Sinners. Bei der anderen geht es das rebellische Cork.
And then we have All the World's a Stage/Screen tour. So I show a photograph of the very famous now Cillian Murphy, Oscar winner for Oppenheimer, but he's from Cork City as well, where we follow different movies and plays and TV series that have been shot in Cork or have starred Cork people, like Derry Girls, which a lot of people will know. The nun, the most famous nun in that, Siobhan, is actually from Cork as well. And Joffrey from Game of Thrones, the evil king, was also born in Cork. So there's a lot of things that people don't realise. Aunt Petunia from Harry Potter is Fiona Shaw. She's from Cork too. So they would be three of the tours that we do in the city centre. There's so much history in Cork that we couldn't possibly cram everything into one tour, which is why we do 3 or 4 tours, So it's great fun. And we also have medieval madness, so there's sections of the city that are obviously from medieval times, and we kind of go from Barrack Street, which would have been where the peasants lived outside the city walls on the south side, up to Shandon Street, where the peasants would have lived on the north side. But we go right through the medieval heart of Cork, and we discuss things like Battle of the Starlings, which was this crazy phenomenon that happened in 1622 in the city, where a group of starlings, a murmuration I think is what it's called, and they're moving as one, from at the east of the city, flew into the city, over the city, and crashed into another murmuration of starlings coming from the west. They obviously got confused and fought. So there was this huge battle of the starlings over the city, which actually blacked out the sun. It must have been terrifying. And in a time in the 1600s where people actually believed in witchcraft and bad omens, this would have been absolutely scary. But it lasted for days over the city, and there was dead birds falling from the sky. Yeah, it was absolutely nuts. And it was actually reported in newspapers in London, which is the only written down records that I could find were from London newspapers about the Battle of the Starlings over the city of Cork. It was absolutely crazy. And there's first-hand accounts written of what people were witnessing and everything. There was birds with other birds' beaks, in their chests falling from the sky, birds with missing eyes. It was just, it's absolutely disgusting. And kids particularly love this part of the tour. They love it because we have masks, and we get the people in the crowd with us to become the starlings, and they get to caw and flap their wings when I'm trying to tell the story. So they have to get louder as I'm trying to tell the story. They're wearing masks. It's great fun. We find those videos all over social media where people are just pretending to be starlings in the streets in Cork. But it's so much fun. Could have been a bad omen because later on that year, Cork City burned to the ground. Oh. So they did take it literally that it was the beginning.
Went down.
Yeah. No, it was lightning. But it would have been much more dramatic if it was a burning starling.
Habt ihr davon schon mal was gehört, von der Schlacht der Stare am Himmel über Cork? Da sind tatsächlich zwei riesige Vogelschwärme aufeinander geprallt und man weiß bis heute nicht genau, weshalb die nicht einfach weitergeflogen sind, sondern sich stattdessen stundenlang am Himmel beharrt haben. Manche Quellen sagen sogar, die Battle of the Starlings sei einen Tag später nochmal in eine weitere Runde gegangen. Man kann sich, glaube ich, gut vorstellen, wie das die Menschen im Mittelalter verängstigt haben muss. Und auch, was da los ist, wenn Angelas Tour-Teilnehmer mit Vogelmasken auf den Köpfen das bei einer Führung nachspielen. Und jeder, der gerade vorbeikommt, mit den Armen wackelt und so tut, als sei auch er ein Vogel. Woher kennt Angela eigentlich all diese skurrilen Anekdoten aus der Geschichte von Cork?
Well, my grandfather was a postman, so his route would have been along that area. So I remember as a kid, my dad telling me the stories his dad had told him about the area, you know, and looking down at the pavement to look for plaques and looking up at the, you know, the buildings, things that people walk past every day and don't realise that are there. So for me, it's really personal because I have that memory. Those memories come back when I tell the stories. Yeah, so it's really lovely. And I really enjoy, especially telling kids, you know, the stories. Because for me, I was a child being told those stories on that path. And I think that's really important to keep it going.
So much better than just going to the library and do studies.
100%, yeah, yeah. But it was funny because I remember my grandfather actually bringing me out on the street and pointing at buildings and saying, like, what's different about this one from the one next door? And he would tell me the whole history of, you know, why the building was different, or the laneways on North Main Street and South Main Street are still medieval sized. So they're really, really narrow. So narrow that they don't look like laneways now. They're kind of where people store the garbage, the garbage cans, you know, from businesses. But these would have been medieval laneways, you know, and just to think back at that people would have lived and worked here and gone about their business every day in these tiny little lanes, and people walk past them every day, not realising that's so much history. We started off as a little settlement where St. Finbarr's Cathedral was, overlooking the city on a limestone cliff, and then, you know, the Vikings arrived and then they created this whole area, and then we have the Normans arriving and then they built a walled city, and then we have the Williamites coming in with the Siege of Cork in 1690, destroying that wall, and instead of just giving up, we just expanded. We built over the river and the marsh to create the city that we know today. And the area that we're in now is the Victorian quarter. So as time has gone on, there's been, every time somebody has come into Cork, they've extended or expanded and created their different sections. And so we have so much history in Cork City that people don't actually realise, you know, when they come to visit, that there's so much history here. Yeah. And of course, the harbour that comes all the way into the Cork City is the second largest natural harbour in the world. So in the harbour alone, there's 1,000 years or more of history.
Yeah. Is the harbour one of the reasons people decided to build a city or a fortress over here? Because they knew it's very important if you go to the seas, if you have ships and fleets. And
100%, yeah. Like, and it's played a huge part of, I suppose, the shaping of Cork. Because obviously the Vikings had ships, they had to sail in here. Our motto basically is a safe haven or a safe harbour for all. In Latin, and so I mean, it was very sheltered, and you know, it was just a beautiful area as well. And Cork, the name Cork comes from Quirlige, which actually means marshy place. So the original name was Quirlige Moor, which means the Great Marsh of Munster, and over time it's gotten shortened and anglicised to Cork, from Quirlige to Cork.
Marsh of Munster?
Yeah, the Great Marsh of Munster, yeah. So I know in Germany there's an area called Munster. Munster, isn't there? Yes, it's spelled the same without the umlaut over the U. So that's the area. The area. So there's 4 provinces of Ireland. So there's Munster, Ulster, Leinster, and Connacht. So Cork is in Munster. So the Great Marsh of Munster is.
Just in your Munster.
Oh, Munster would have been far more dramatic and pretty cool, actually. But there is actually a tale about a monster, which I love. It dates back to the founding of Cork City, and so St. Finbar was from West Cork, a place called Gugan Barra. And that's where the River Lee, the Lee that runs through Cork City, starts. And the tale is that St. Finbar was looking for a place to set up a school and monastery. So he followed the river downstream until he came to a limestone cliff. And that was Cork, right? But that's the boring story. The story that we were told as kids, because it was more dramatic, had a monster involved. And so apparently there was this serpent with 2 tails who was eating children and cattle and making off with cattle in the night. So St. Finbar, defending the people, chased him from Gougane to what is now Cork City. And the beast panicked when it got to this part of the river, the marsh. And actually, the forked tail is the reason why Cork is actually an island. So that's the tail apparently went on either side of this marsh and dragged behind him and carved out the river into 2, which divided the city, and then off he went and was chased off to the sea, never to be seen again by St. Finbar. So,
And you left him.
So there was a monster of Munster then, I guess, if we're going to look at it like that. But it's kind of cool, because when people come to Cork, I always feel sorry for people who get a little bit lost in Cork City, because they say, oh, I'm staying by the river. And as Corkonians, we just look at them and go, oh, which side? Like, was it the north channel of the River Lee or the south channel? Because there's a river on both sides. Yeah. So I said, look, there's plenty of pubs you can fall into until you find your hotel. But it's lovely, and I think we're an island city as well because of that story, which I think is far more interesting than him just walking along a river and finding somewhere to start a city. So, so Monsters in Munster then.
Habt ihr das gerade vorhin mitbekommen? Man muss Angela tatsächlich nur ein Stichwort geben und schon fällt ihr dazu was ein. Weil ich Monster statt Monster verstanden hatte, sind wir auf die Legende mit dem Drachen gekommen und von der dann anschließend auf mögliche Orientierungsschwierigkeiten, die man in Cork haben kann, wenn man zwar weiß, dass das Hotel irgendwo am Fluss liegt, aber nicht genau an welchem. Und dass es ganz schön spät werden kann, wenn man abends auf der Suche dann noch 1 oder 2 oder 3 interessante Pubs entdeckt. Von denen gibt es in Cork übrigens einige und auch ganz viele tolle Läden und Geschäfte und den berühmten English Market natürlich, auf dem man alles bekommt, was die Leute im County Cork an leckeren Dingen herstellen. Die Stadt ist überhaupt eine gute Basis für Ausflüge in die Umgebung. Blarney Castle steht ja gleich um die Ecke. Um das ging es ja in Folge 45 hier bei Irisch Gut. Und Coff mit seinem Hafen und der Titanic-Ausstellung, das war auch schon mal Thema in der Folge über die irischen Auswanderer, Episode 24 war das. Aber nochmal schnell zurück zu den Pubs, zu dem, in dem wir saßen. Zu dem wusste Angela natürlich auch eine Geschichte.
We're sitting in Dan Lowry's pub at the moment on McCurtain Street, and it's actually teeming with history that a lot of people don't realise. For a start, it's built next door to the Palace Theatre, or the Everyman Palace Theatre, as it was called for a really long time. It's the second oldest music hall theatre in Ireland, and actually the Olympia in Dublin, and the theatre next door were built by the same person, Dan Lowry, which is why the pub is named after him. So there's been a building on the site since obviously the 1890s when the theatre was built next door, 1897. I'm not sure when it was changed the name to Dan Lowry's, but it's named after this man. But as a result of its proximity to the theatre, it's kind of like where all of the actors hang out, the producers have got, meetings here, but also they were very famous up until about a year ago. I'm not sure if they still do it because I haven't had one recently, but their toasted sandwiches have always been famous. It's sustenance for the actors next door before they go into do a performance. And on the walls here, you'll see a lot of mirrors. You'll have tobacco mirrors, or you'll have whiskey advertisements and Guinness advertisements, Beamish, which would be the local stout, Murphy's, which is another local stout. These mirrors would have been on the walls of other pubs in Cork city and county, which were then, I suppose, as pubs were modernised, rescued by the previous owners and put on the walls here. So we're actually just surrounded by history, just sitting here having a cup of tea or a pint. You're sitting here surrounded with history. And on the wall over there, there's a poster for a play called Between the Hooters, which was actually written by my own father, which has my signature on it because I worked on the production. So there's framed posters of plays that have gone on next door. There's an old telephone that was rescued. I think that was rescued from an old school. There's a photograph that they now have in the window. It used to be where we're sitting right now, of John F. Kennedy in his car with the year he was killed. actually visited Cork, and of him travelling outside the pub. So there's a photograph of him with the pub in the background. So there's so much history involved in the building that we're in. And a lot of the buildings in Cork have a lot of history attached to them, which is why when we're doing the dinner theatre, my favourite part of the night is we have sections throughout the dinner theatre that we will stop the action and come and have a conversation with the audience and just sit like we're talking now. We do all the serving and all the singing, all the performing when people come. And it's my favourite part of the night. While I love performing and singing for people, I love talking to people. And when we have locals come in, they will give us more and more stories about buildings and their grandparents and, you know, cars and famous people and funny stories as well. Which is why we started the walking tour, because I can't fit all of them into a 2-hour show.
Right. So the show was first?
Yes, the show was first.
In addition to that, you have the walking tours.
Yeah. So that's the order it happened in, because, you know, the show can only be 2.5 hours and we're trying to do the whole history of Cork City from the beginning of time with St. Finbar, with that story I told you, with the monster, right up to modern day. Two of the most modern things that we have in it is Nirvana playing here in 1991. And everyone in Cork City says they were at the gig, even though the venue could only hold about 100 people. If you asked all 250,000 people in Cork have been to where everyone was at that. Oh, I absolutely saw Nirvana. So that's kind of like a local legend story. That's one of the most modern stories. And then right up to, I suppose, the building and the opening of the reopening of the School of Music, which is actually predates the School of Music in London by 2 years. It's been around for a very long time. But when they reopened it, there's a story that they tried to order Steinway pianos from New York, and the people in New York didn't think they were serious because nobody's ever ordered that amount of Steinway pianos in one go. So they kept hanging up on the Cork School of Music, thinking they were joking, but they were actually being serious. So I think that was 2003. That's kind of one of the more modern stories.
So they were ordering 10?
No, I think it was 57. It was a lot. Yeah, now don't quote me because it's not my line in the show, but I'm pretty sure it's 57. No wonder they didn't take them seriously. 57 baby grand pianos is a lot of pianos. To be fair to the Steinway company, you can kind of see why they thought it was a hoax call. We just love having those stories and the personal histories with people as well, you know, who come to the show, which is why we love having locals come. And obviously we like people coming from all over the world to learn about Cork. But the way it's set up at the dinner theatre, people sit at these big long banquet tables, and it means that, you know, if you were coming from Germany with your family, you would be sitting maybe with somebody from Cork and their husband celebrating an anniversary, or, you know, someone from America or Canada, and you can swap stories about where you're going or where you've been. But there's always going to be an Irish person on the table to have a bit of banter that we're famous for with, as well as us coming from the stage and talking to people. And I love that. It's just, we've created this community, you know, every night. And we've actually had people invite us to their weddings. They've met at our dinner theatre. They invited us to their wedding in Maine. We've had people hand keys to a family. There was a lovely couple who were celebrating their anniversary, probably 2 summers ago now. And they were sitting with this lovely couple and a young boy from, I think they were from California. And I actually thought they were related because they were talking so much and really enjoying each other's company. And it turns out they had just met that night at the dinner theatre. And at the end of the night, the couple handed the family the keys to their holiday home in West Cork for the weekend and just said, when you're finished, you can just give the postmaster our keys back. I just thought it was crazy. I was like, I just think that's so special, and it's so uniquely Cork, I feel. I don't think you'll find it anywhere else in the world, except Ireland, but definitely Cork.
Wie schön, oder? Die platzieren die Gäste bei ihren Theaterdinnern so, dass immer auch Einheimische zwischen den Touristen von außerhalb sitzen und Besucher immer mit den Locals ins Gespräch kommen und umgekehrt. Das passiert einem wohl auch nur in Irland so.
We're famous for our people being friendly, but also famous for not taking much nonsense from anybody either.
Right.
you know. There's a part of our All the World's a Stage /Screen tour that we do where we talk about famous people who come to Cork because no one will pay attention to them. We have this thing in Cork where we think we're better than everyone else. I mean, it's true, obviously, Stefan. We are better than everyone else. But we like to tell everyone that we're better than everyone else in Cork. So when someone becomes famous who's from Cork or Irish or anywhere, or famous people come from anywhere, we kind of pretend we don't know who they are. You know, like, who do you think you are? Like, you're not better than me just because you're famous. And I just love that about Cork people, you know. In fact, we've had a famous story where Kanye West and Kim Kardashian were here on honeymoon, and they were annoyed that no one was stopping to take their photograph. But then we have people who live in Cork, like Jeremy Irons, who loves the fact that he can go to the local pub and no one cares that he's Jeremy Irons, you know. And we do have that more often than not. We have some really famous people who come and holiday here in County Cork or in the city, and people will just say, "Hi, how are you?" and just, you know, not ask them for a photograph or anything.
No screaming, no selfies.
It's amazing. There's actually one of the actors from, there was a TV series called The Young Offenders that was set in Cork, and one of the actors, quite a young actor, went into a music store in Cork City. Now, he's from Cork, so he should have known better. He's from Cork, and he went in to buy a guitar, and the lady said, "What about a pic?" And he said, "Oh, I suppose, I mean, yes, you can have my picture." And she said, No, a guitar pic." And he said he's never felt so brought back to earth so quickly in his life. He said, then I remembered where I was. I was in Cork and no one cared that I was famous. So everyone's equal here.
Die Stadt, in der jede und jeder gleich ist. Was für eine sympathische Aussage, oder? Wenn ihr jetzt Lust auf Cork bekommen habt, könnt ihr die Stadt ja mal einplanen auf eurer nächsten Irlandreise. Man kann da auch hinfliegen, direkt von Deutschland aus, oder auch mit der Bahn von Dublin aus hinfahren oder auch mit der Fähre kommen, die in Cork anlegt. Und natürlich müsst ihr dann eine Tour mit Angela unternehmen oder zu einem ihrer Theaterdinner gehen. Ich garantiere euch, mehr Cork geht nicht.
Irisch gut. Stories und Tipps von der grünen Insel.